Welcome to Lunch Hour Live. I'm Sue O'Connell. Good to see you again. You know, you think Martin Luther King, John Lewis, Malcolm X, these are the names that come to mind when we think of the civil rights movement. But what about Isaac Woodard? In 1946, Isaac Woodard, he's a black Army sergeant. He was savagely beaten by the local chief of police, leaving him permanently blind. Now, the incident, it made national headlines, and it jump-started the modern civil rights movement. American Experience details this event and its historic aftermath in their new film, The Blinding of Isaac Woodard. Today, I'm joined by the folks behind this film, but first, I want to set the stage for you. It's 1946, and Isaac Woodard is on a Greyhound bus on his way home from serving in World War II. He asks the driver to stop so he can use the restroom. The driver relents and summons two police officers at the next stop. The officers violently beat Woodard, gouging his eyes out and throwing him in jail. The rest is history.
Good morning, this is Orson Welles speaking. I'd like to read to you an affidavit. I, Isaac Woodard, Jr., being duly sworn, do depose and state as follows. I'm 27 years old and a veteran of the United States Army, having served for 15 months in the South Pacific and earned 1 battle star. While I was in uniform, I purchased a ticket to Winnsboro, South Carolina, and took the bus headed there to pick up my wife to come to New York to see my father and mother. About 1 hour out of Atlanta, the bus drivers got off and went and got the police. The policeman grabbed me by my left arm and twisted it behind my back. I figured he was trying to make me resist. I did not resist against him. Another policeman held his gun on me while the other one was beating me. I started to get up. He started punching me in my eyes. He knocked me unconscious. I woke up next morning and could not see. They took me to the Veterans Hospital in Columbia, South Carolina. They told me I should join a blind school.
You have a man wearing a dress uniform. He has medals on his chest. All the symbols of sacrifice and service are there. And it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
To a white Southerner in 1946, nothing is more provocative than a black man in uniform.
You have law enforcement coming with the full savagery of Southern racism. No one can say that what happened to Isaac Woodard was justified.
It just seemed to be something that shouldn't happen in America.
Now it seems the officer of the law is just another white man with a stick who wanted to teach a Negro boy a lesson, to show a Negro boy where he belonged, in the darkness.
Are we going to have people who live in the United States and are less equal than others? What are we going to do about this?
Today, I'm joined by the women behind this exceptional documentary, American Express executive producer Cameo George. Welcome back, Cameo. Good to see you.
Hi.
And filmmaker Jamila Ephron. Welcome. Good to see you.
Hi.
I want to tell folks at home to make sure, as you're watching on FaceTube and YouTube, if you have questions, just put them in the comments and we'll get to them through the show. Cameo, what an extraordinary documentary. I didn't read any of the materials in advance of watching it. I mean, obviously I know my history, but I did not know this story of Isaac Woodard at all. And the story, I'm getting goosebumps, just the story of how you weave the thread from his experience to, I won't give the end away. How about that? But the terrible thing, the terrible crime that Isaac Woodard was a victim to is so reminiscent, sadly, of so many crimes, including the most recent crimes against the late George Floyd. Did you plan the release of this film now because of the state of the country, or is it just a sad fact that you probably could have released this anytime?
I think it really is a sad fact that these horrific examples of police brutality they continue to occur. And so we could not have known when this film was commissioned, when Jamila came on board, that that it would be released in the wake of the environment that we're living through right now. But as you said, it's a sad fact. And you know, I think that one of the things that's important to us at American Experience is that we focus on historical documentaries that feel timely and that feel relevant in whatever year it is that you're watching the film. But obviously, this is not a circumstance that we would have wanted.
Yeah. Jamila, one of the things that's interesting to me about this story is the crime against him happens at a time when crimes against Black Americans are not, and I want to say this delicately, but somewhat factually, not uncommon, sadly. So what was it about the police brutality against Isaac Woodard that made it shocking to people who previously had experienced and seen this kind of violence and were not moved to any kind of action or reaction?
Well, I think it was a few things about Sergeant Woodard's story that drew so much attention to it. One was the circumstances. This was a decorated officer, literally just hours after discharge. So that was part of it. It really challenged our ideas about patriotism when someone who has just stood up to fight for human rights and democracy comes home and is treated this way immediately, basically. But the other reason is that he was alive. A lot of Black veterans, a lot of Black people did not survive their encounters with police officers and with Southern racism in general. But Isaac Woodard did, and he could tell his story and bore on his face the evidence that it was true. And that was a unique situation.
You know, both my dad and my uncle served in World War II, and neither of them spoke about their experiences. Both were white men until my dad passed away, but my uncle, who passed away in his 90s just a couple of years ago, and he recently started talking about his experiences again. And one story he would tell happened here in America when he first shipped up, joined the Army, and talked about the way the white Southern soldiers treated the Black soldiers. And I used to think it was a bit of a cover for him to be able to say it was the Southern soldiers who were doing it, we weren't doing it. But after watching your documentary, I now see this shield of culture that the South seemed to have, not to excuse the North or the West or the East from doing anything to fight racism. But this shield of culture that allowed the South to exist in a way that kept it from moving forward. And the line in the film about, quote, nothing is more provocative than a Black man in uniform, end quote. Either one of you, was that a catalyst sort of to move civil rights forward because of the fear certain people felt about Black men, especially coming back after having served our nation?
Well, I think that Black men in uniform had always been a target because they were emblems of authority, as one of our interviewees said. They had just served the country. So if anyone is entitled to the rights of citizenship, to the full rights of citizenship, it is someone who has served their country. And so that was just the very appearance of them in their uniform was a challenge to systems of white supremacy. But I think what was happening after World War II was actually something that was happening within these Black people returning home, which is they had done this so many times. They have served in every war since this country existed, and their treatment never improved. And this was just enough is enough. The principles of World War II were so stark, and they had fought for them. And I think it reached a fever pitch that things were going to change this time.
Yeah, Cameo, we're again in one of those situations where we're presenting ourselves, United States, as the epitome of human rights, right? And the rescuers and the liberators, yet we're not exactly living that credo at home.
Right. I mean, can you imagine what it must have been like to fight overseas and see what you see, experience what you experience, and then you come home and you are right back to second-class citizenship? I mean, it's unimaginable what these men, and it was largely men, went through at this time. And you can understand why there came a point where for a lot of these men, like Sergeant Woodard, they decided we are standing up for ourselves, and you're not going to call me boy, and you're not going to disrespect me just because you think you can.
Well, many Americans were horrified by the event, and the blinding of Isaac Woodard ignited a racial awakening for an unlikely champion of Black Americans, and that would be the unlikely President Harry Truman. Truman was so moved by this story that within days, the U.S. Attorney General had ordered federal prosecutors to start criminal proceedings against the man responsible for Woodard's blinding. Now, given his upbringing in a town that celebrated its Confederate heritage, his motivation to take action against the crime seemed a bit like a miracle. Let's take a look.
Civil rights leaders had good reason to regard Harry Truman as an unlikely champion of Black Americans. He had grown up in Independence, Missouri, a town that still celebrated its Confederate heritage. Truman's grandparents on both sides were rebel partisans and slave owners.
Harry Truman's mother thought John Wilkes Booth was an American hero. She refused to sleep in the Lincoln bedroom in the White House.
He grew up in a household where belief in white supremacy was simply in the air. People used racial epithets very casually, and he continued to use them well into his adult life.
Despite his background, President Truman was willing to listen to the concerns of civil rights advocates. On September 19, 1946, Truman invited Walter White and a delegation of religious and labor leaders for a meeting in the Oval Office.
The meeting begins, and the civil rights leaders are asking the president to pass legislation prohibiting lynching in America. Harry Truman says to the leaders, "I understand your concerns, but there's not in the will in this country for new legislation." Walter White is listening to this discussion, and he realizes that Harry Truman doesn't get it. He stops the discussion and says, "Mr. President, I need to tell you the story of the blinding of Isaac Woodard."
Cameo, what do you think happened to Truman? I mean, you know, this was not news to him that these things were happening, other injustices like these were happening. What was the tipping point for him?
I think it's really interesting that Truman had himself been a uniformed soldier, and he probably knew firsthand the amount of respect and deference that he got when he was in uniform, the amount of thanks he probably received from the community, and the idea that someone who could have been his compatriot in the fight would have been treated this way was mind-altering to him. I mean, it really is. It's cataclysmic, the fact that, you know, that the uniform that was so meaningful to him could be so meaningless on someone else. And I really think that something just clicked where he got it.
Jamila, do you think that Isaac Woodard became a symbol of America to Truman? Do you think it was more than just the uniform or just the service, or, you know, as Cameo saying that we could have served together, we could have been together in the field, but that Truman maybe saw this as an attack on America from an internal American?
Well, yeah, I think Isaac Woodard's story gave the lie to the idea that the United States had moral authority, and he saw that as somewhat as a threat to our place in the world. That if this is how we treat our own servicemen, how can we be a beacon of morality for the rest of the world? How can anyone look to us if this is how we treat our own?
Jamila, I want to talk to you about the process of putting this film together, because I can't even imagine. You know, I know that there's a limited amount of images that you have, right, and film, and you're a great storyteller, and you want to make sure you use everything to its best ability. But when you're putting this story together, do you have an idea of what the arc of the story is going to be, or do you sometimes let the footage that you discover or the footage that you were going to use one way guide you in a different way? What's your process?
Well, with this film, you know, we had a book that we were kind of following a blueprint for. So I knew where the story was going and was just praying we would find the right materials to help us tell the story. So it wasn't kind of like a free-for-all. We're looking for something that's going to cinch it up, but you are looking desperately for images that are representative of the story you're telling. And certainly there were some surprises in there. The sort of musings on what life in Charleston was like. For example, we have a section on the culture of Charleston, and, you know, the sort of cluelessness that was evident in the narrator describing what it's like, and the racial dynamics. It's just that I couldn't have seen coming. So you're always looking for moments where you can open up and kind of reveal things like that.
Yeah, that definitely, I got to say, I remember that piece, and it really warmed up a little bit what the experience for some people was, or what people were projecting that area to be like. Look, at another unlikely hero in the story is Judge J. Waddies Waring. He's the man who presided over the police officer's trial. Now, the police officer was acquitted by an all-white jury, and Waring chose to devote the rest of his career to fight against racism. Waring goes on to advise Thurgood Marshall to file a case to challenge the separate but equal clause of Plessy v. Ferguson, despite the risk that the Supreme Court could very well uphold it. Let's take a look.
What Judge Waring was pushing him to do was very risky. If you launched a concerted effort to overturn Plessy and failed, your years of all that work would have been thrown on the trash heap of history. Thurgood Marshall says, Judge, it's on our agenda, it's just not tonight. This is not the time, this is not the place. What he wasn't saying explicitly was, this is the last place in the world we're going to try to desegregate the schools. This is down the end of the road, not the beginning. Judge Waring said, this is the time. This is the case. You're going to be challenging the constitutionality of a state law. You're going to lose. But you will plant the case directly and automatically onto the docket of the U.S. Supreme Court. And he said, Thurgood, that's where you want to be.
At Waring's urging, Marshall petitioned the court to dismiss the current case and bring a new suit, one alleging that segregation in South Carolina's public schools was unconstitutional. Marshall and his team spent the next month preparing to refile, but they also needed approval from the plaintiffs to move ahead.
Marshall was always very powerfully conscious of the risks being taken by plaintiffs. And if you knew anything about Clarendon County in that period, you knew that the Briggs and others who stood up to the system in that jurisdiction were going to have hell to pay.
You know, there's a saying, good plaintiffs make good law, and it's always tricky in almost any civil rights action to think that the end game is going to be the Supreme Court under any circumstance. But I want to talk a little bit about Judge Waring, who, you know, had it not been for a couple of bridge games where he met his future wife, the road here might be on certainly I would hope we would still be here, but the road here would be a different path. What's it like as you're kind of digging in, and I'll ask you, Jamila, when you're digging into these stories of people that are just kind of sentences in our encyclopedias and sentences in our histories, and they come out with these full-blown stories, and this judge is certainly one of them.
Yeah, he was a complex guy. I mean, and the story we tell is, unfortunately, some of the juiciest details we can't really go into, and we don't need to, and we don't know. But you know, he got together with his wife, who kind of joined him in his activism extramaritally, which completely ostracized him from life in Charleston already. The civil rights activities cemented that, but you know, I wouldn't have known anything about Judge Waring if I hadn't dived into this story. He really is sort of a footnote, but huge player.
Yeah, and
yeah.
Cameo.
And can I just say? Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, you know, definitely Judge Waring is definitely someone who deserves to be way more than a footnote, as Jamila was saying. But it's interesting seeing this, learning of this story in this context. I think of Judge Waring as being like the ultimate in allyship, right? Like we go through these experiences, we see these awful incidents even in our present day lives, and people are always thinking about what can I do, and if I'm not a member of the group that is being oppressed, it's easy to, you know, sort of think, oh, that's awful, and move on. But Judge Waring and his wife, they did the exact opposite. You know, they went into their own course of self-education, and, you know, read books and taught themselves, and tried to dissect their own relation to the African American community and figure out, like, what can we do? And so I just really think that's a beautiful aspect of this story, that he could have very easily presided over that first case of Sergeant Woodard and been like, unfortunate result, and moved on, but he didn't.
Yeah, the echoes in this documentary, both negative and positive, are so compelling in this time. I mean, I was struck by that part. They did what, like, every diversity coach is telling you to do now: go get these books and read them, and, you know, surround yourself with the people who are having the experience. I want to get back to Cameo, to the how this violence against Isaac Woodard really set this stage for the argument of Brown v. Board of Education. And like I said, I didn't read the advanced material, so I was like, oh my gosh, this is where we're going with this. How do we not know about this? How was Isaac Woodard not, you know, such an essential part? I mean, even he didn't know the part that he played in this enormous victory.
Well, that's the thing. It's so amazing. I mean, I think all three of us have acknowledged that we did not know his story at all before this film. And what was so interesting to me, as Jamila was finding footage and bringing in interviews, was that Woodard was almost a celebrity in his time. I mean, he went on a speaking tour. He filled stadiums. People came out to hear him. People knew his story. You know, we started out with the clip of Orson Welles talking about his story, who was, you know, one of the biggest stars of that era. And for me, it's kind of, it's this sad thing, but also this inspiring thing about why we need to be doing historical documentaries and why we need to be telling these stories, because there's really no reason why he was lost to history other than the fact that he points to a period that was very uncomfortable. And so we don't always want to be reminded of that. But really, there's no reason that every single American should not know his name.
Jamila, when you're working on the film, I guess in any film in general, when you're approaching a documentary, how do the events of what's happening in the moment that you're working on the documentary impact the way you might want to tell the story? You know, are you like living in the moment of what's happening with us right now, or are you thinking, I'm going to try and tell this story in a bit of a bubble so that it will go forward in time without having to know exactly what's happening in 2020 in order to resonate with an audience?
I mean, I think it's a bit of both. We're a historical film series, so we work in the past, and we started this film before George Floyd, before the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020 started. Certainly when we were at the peak of principal photography was when they were also at their peak in June. So the resonance was really hard to miss. I think if it changed things, it was more, it's hard not to feel really angry about what was going on. And so I was able to take out some of that anger on Linwood Shaw, I guess, and sort of not give them a pass, not give these historical figures who had turned a blind eye to what was going on a pass. I remember specifically this came up in the section around Judge Waring's previous life before he had become awakened to the realities in Charleston and to race. And I just thought, how could he not have seen this? How could he not have known? And it did shift the line of interview questions that I was asking a little to just sort of hold his feet to the fire a little as a white man with some power in this community. But generally, you're trying to stay in the moment, in the historical moment that you're telling the story of.
Yeah, the power of denial, is and also the power of suppression. The storyline of finally folks being able, Black and African Americans being able to register to vote, but basically doing it in a way that their rights are still being suppressed. Yet, Cameo, this is a story that we're still talking about.
Right. And that really is the tragic thing of it all. I mean, there are untold inspirational beats throughout this film. And overall, I do think that you feel energized when you see it. This is not a film that you're going to see and just, be depressed and sad. I think you'll be motivated, but I think that, as Jamila said, it's hard to miss those parallels to today. She did not have to be literal in mentioning modern day voter suppression, police brutality, all those things. But if you have eyes, it's there.
And I just want to talk just again about Isaac Woodard, who, what a tremendously brave and resilient human being, to have gone through a torture, to the degree that he did, the blinding and the violence and the attack. And then where many, I'm sure, would just say, that's it, I'm all done. He was able to continue to fight, and this time fight for the rights of his fellow Americans after his service to World War II. What an inspiration he is.
Indeed.
Is there a message, Jamila, that you want folks? This is kind of always my wrap-up question. Is there a top-line message, if there's one thing you want folks to come away from this with?
There's lots of truths that I think I would like people to take away from this film about the nature of racism and the sort of the hard truth about police brutality that we have to acknowledge, that it's a continuum and it's been going on for decades, centuries even. And so that I would like that to shift how we look at this current conversation we're having about police violence. But I also think that there's something to also be gleaned about how history is actually made, that, Isaac Woodard didn't mean to throw all these events in motion. He just stood up for himself and just said, speak to me with a little respect, basically. Judge Waring, he didn't expect that he would become a part of this movement. And the Briggs plaintiffs down the road who just wanted a school bus, they were just trying to get their kids to school. So all of these individuals just taking these small actions, doing what they could, ended up having a profound effect on the legal history of our country. And I think there's a lesson there too.
Yeah, it's also just the absurdity of denying these things, which is it's really just puts in stark contrast how the basic necessities and respect that we all deserve are easier to do rather than denying people basic human rights. So it was an extraordinary film and great storytelling as well. So tell me, Cameo, where can folks watch this great film?
This great film, The Blinding of Isaac Woodard, premieres next week on GBH and all PBS channels across the country, March 30th. Please watch.
Thank you to both of you for taking time out. I hope we speak again soon. Well done. And I look forward to future conversations. Thank you for watching on YouTube and Facebook. We'll be back in April with Nova's Picture a Scientist. Until then, stay safe, register for your vaccine if you haven't gotten it yet, and mask up. I'm Sue O'Connell. I'll see you soon.